Welcome back to the Politics with Paul podcast, your home for nonpartisan discussion of political science and civics. I am your host, Paul Rader. We have another great guest today, and for such episodes, I always add a disclaimer that I do not take a stance for or against a guest's political views or groups they support, but our topics are always something that people across the political spectrum can learn from. So, American elections have struggled with voter turnout for a long time, but in particular, the youth voter turnout has lagged noticeably behind the turnout rates of older, that is to say, non-youth Americans. And oftentimes that's simply accepted as unchangeable fact, that it is what it is. And sometimes that's led to criticism of youth as quote unquote uninformed, lazy, or unengaged. But is there more to the story? And do we simply have to accept youth turnout rates as perpetually low? Or can we implement long-lasting solutions that noticeably raise that turnout? Well, that's what my guest today, Stephanie Houghton, is here to talk about. Stephanie is the founder of Cirrus Strategies, a political strategy and consulting firm. Previously, she was the managing director and the organizing and political director of Fair Vote Washington. And before that, Stephanie worked on a bunch of campaigns at the federal, state, and local levels in a variety of roles, including campaign manager, deputy field director, communications director, and deputy Get Out the Vote, or GOTV, director. So, with all those things in mind, let's get her insights into youth voter turnout, why it is so low, and how we can improve it. Please welcome Stephanie Houghton. Stephanie, thanks for being on the show. How are you?
Hey, Paul. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on. So let's go back to the beginning. I always like to do this with guests. Why are you particularly invested in youth voter turnout? Were you civically engaged as a youth as well? And how did you compare to your peers in that regard?
Sure. That's a great question. I think that the first thing that I'll say is that, yes, I am definitely interested in youth turnout. I also just generally think there is value in sort of putting different kinds of voters into buckets. Because if we sort of say all of the turnout is low or all of the turnout is high, it's not really useful. So I think like these buckets are really important. So youth turnout is definitely something I care about a lot. It's one of many things I care about. So what I will say is I come from a voting family. Both of my parents, excellent voters. I also come from a small town where from Orleans, Massachusetts. We have something called town meeting there, which is when all of the voting, actually, not even voting, everyone who lives in the town is welcome to attend the town meeting where we literally raise our hands and vote on things together. Everybody goes to the middle school gym, and there are certain things that are brought to the town's attention, and that's how we vote. So my parents used to go to town meetings. So when I say that we were involved, we would go to town meeting and we would be there for hours. And then we would also have to fill out ballots just like everybody else, right? So definitely was very engaged. Specifically, I will say, I think in 10th or 11th grade, definitely before I was able to vote, I volunteered at the voting center in my town. There was only one. It's a small town. That to hang out with people's kids while their parents went into the voting location. I don't even want to call it babysitting. We would allow the kids to also fill out their own ballots. It would take maybe 10 minutes. So we're like, quick rotation of kids here, right? But that was the way that I could participate, right? I wasn't old enough to do the rest of it, but that was really important and really cool. And also a good community building activity. There was a way for me to participate, and there was a way for the kids who needed somebody to look after them to participate as well.
That's neat. It's very, very hardcore direct democracy going on in Orleans, Massachusetts. It sounds almost a little bit like a caucus too.
New England
For the whole
is
town.
big on their town meetings.
Yeah.
I have one of my Substack articles is about it. It's kind of hard to believe it is a thing that happens, but it is a thing that happens. And it's very powerful. It's a very powerful group of people. So we won't go too far down the town meeting rabbit hole, but happy to talk about that later.
Yeah. That is really cool though. I mean, it kind of forces you to engage with other people. And when you more directly engage with other people, you're at least hopefully less likely to be very, shall we say, abrasive with each other.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I think that's pretty neat. Now, the place where I live in the greater Tampa Bay area of Florida, not in Tampa proper, but it's exploded in growth over the past like 6-10 years or so. So but even before it really got that big, we never had anything like town hall meetings, which would have been really cool. But I did. My family is pretty politically socialized too, so I kind of got that a little bit when I was a kid too. But that's really cool to hear about. And I mean, I'm by no means an expert in how the town politics of the Northeast, but I have sort of gotten that vibe from studying at that Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island. That area does really have a lot of emphasis on town government. So that's pretty cool. And I also noted in the intro that you have a variety of experience on the campaign trail. It seems like you were pretty much destined for this with your early socialization. But how often did you focus, on youth voter turnout specifically? And what were some particular experiences that stand out to you? And also, what do you consider to be the ages that constitute quote unquote youth voters?
Sure. So, okay. For me, I'm going to go ahead and say under 40 for youth turnout. This is based on a couple of different things, including, how long have you been a voter? Also, the Democratic and Republican parties both have official young people groups, and those have different ages. So I'm going to say under 40, not just because I am under 40, but because I think it's a couple of different numbers all pulled together. So for me, it's under 40. Campaigns are really interesting when it comes to youth turnout. If you're a campaign, one way to think about your voting populace is how much is it going to cost me per vote? So you hear all these numbers, right? 40 million, $100 million to run these campaigns. In the end, it's how much did I spend on every single voter? Youth voters are expensive because you don't just have to teach them about yourself as a candidate. There's also a chance you have to teach them how to show up, right? How to participate at a really base level. I'm a millennial. Before I go out to dinner, I know what is on the menu. I've narrowed it down to things that I possibly want to eat. I definitely know what I want to drink. I know where the parking is. I know that I needed a reservation. Do I want bar seating? Right? Like all of those things. And then when it comes to how do I vote, that doesn't exist. So, as someone who relies on that for something that is as simple and as straightforward as going out to dinner, like, how are we just kind of saying it's okay to just leave this to the side? It's because campaigns have a limited amount of money. They can't afford to spend that much on single voters. I do not judge them for that. That is not actually their role. A campaign's job is to elect their candidate, get their candidate elected. It is not civic engagement. And so, as a campaign person, there were some things that we did, right? We ran voter registration drives. We tried to encourage youth volunteering because they would talk to their friends and maybe get them to vote. But young people are very expensive. They might not even be registered, right? So how does a candidate go find them if they have not raised their hands and said, I'm even here? So I will say all of that. And then one sort of mind-blowing moment for me was a friend of mine. I was going to town meeting. But even before that, I had said, oh, I'm going to go vote today. He said, oh, where do you even do that? We are both from the same town. The voting location has not changed in 40 years. I was shocked and basically said, it's at the Council on Aging. It's the same place it's always been. And he was like, oh, okay. So like, what do you do when you get there? And in Massachusetts, what you do when you get there is you go get in line based on the name of your street, which would be pretty confusing if you've never done it before. But it was this mind-blowing thing that, first of all, this person was almost 40. He had never voted. And it wasn't that he didn't want to. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was that he had no idea how to do it. And admittedly, my reaction was not good. My reaction was sort of, oh my gosh, I'm going to give you a hard time about never voting, as opposed to saying, hey, why don't you just come with me? Massachusetts does not have same-day registration, but let's get you registered and you can vote next time. So that's another thing I think young people often feel really judged by campaigns for not voting. They're blamed for not voting as opposed to being empowered to vote. And again, not the campaign's fault. Their job is to get someone elected, not to promote civic engagement. So that's actually part of why I've moved over into election reform, because I think it kind of takes that on a little bit more intentionally. It takes on youth voting a little more intentionally.
You're talking about your experience with that, with your friend, or at least that same person in your town. It kind of goes back to the idea that for those of us who are very politically socialized, all these things seem very obvious to us because this is what our life's work is in. But somebody who, their life's work is completely in something different. They've got all these other things going on that take up their time, and it's a lot harder for them to learn. These are not obvious things to us. There's always something in our field that seems like, why doesn't it? How do people not know this? But you sometimes have to put yourself in other people's shoes, and it is kind of an unfortunate way that it's part of that whole ballot information gap that we've got to solve. And it just left my head. Something else you just said.
I'll just say really quickly while
Go ahead.
you're thinking that
Yeah.
arguably that's why we have a democracy, right? We want to be able to vote for someone and then be sure that that person is going to go represent our interests, because I do not want to have an opinion about every single thing. That takes massive amounts of research. I
Yeah.
would like someone to decide to be a professional representative and really live in that information. And I, as a constituent, should be able to vote for or against them. Like, I should be able to do that. That should be my role in a democracy. It shouldn't be really complicated or really hard. It should be made as easy as possible. That's why we chose a democracy.
Yeah. I remember the other thing because you were talking about how campaigns, their job is not to civically engage, which is true for better and for worse. It is. You know, it can seem, when people look at all these typically presidential campaigns or US Senate or even some US House ones or governor, where there's just exponential amounts of money spent on these elections. But even those are finite, and there's only so much that you can do to reach out to certain voters. And even if you had the money to reach out to youth voters, campaigns have to think about, well, who do I have a reasonable chance of getting over to my side, but is not already set on my side? Because if they're already going to vote for me, obviously, I don't have to spend money on them. But if they're not going to vote for you, no matter what you do, then you don't spend money on them anyway. So how do you find those people that are possibly going to vote for you, but you have to really, set them in stone? And that can be very difficult to do for youth voters, even when you do have the resources. So it is a good point there. Obviously, ideally, you'd like them to campaigns to civically engage people, but it's just like you said, it's not their job, and they have a bunch of other priorities, like getting their candidate elected, that they have to focus on. But let's go in a little bit more about those struggles for youth voter turnout. In your estimation, what are 2 to 3 of the biggest reasons that you'd say there is for low youth voter turnout rates? And what do you think we could do to flip those on their heads?
Sure. I think that young voters have the same problem a lot of other voters have. But one of them is we think all the candidates are the same, right? And whether that's true or not, that's sort of the narrative that our society has taken on. You're just voting for the lesser of two evils. Okay, great. Then why would I do that? Why would I show up at all? And I think that's fair, right? Turnover in Congress is very, very low.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the second thing is, well, there are many things, but one of the other things is my vote doesn't even count. And I think that stems from the Electoral College existing. And a lot of young people feel like, oh, I'm being told that my vote really matters, but in the end, it does not. And I think that, first of all, on that first one, we need to provide better candidates. Right. And that's why the election reform space really called to me was we need better, we need more. I want an actual choice, right? I want to be able to think about different policies and make a decision based on several things that I care about as opposed to one major thing that I care about. So I think that's a totally fair take. But I also don't think that we can just say we need better candidates and then get better candidates. I think we have to
Right.
change some systems. The other piece about, my vote doesn't even count because, I live in Massachusetts and I'm a Republican and this state's never going to vote for a Republican. That is not true. That is not fair. It might be true for the Electoral College, the presidency, but that's literally one guy. And it's always a guy. It's not, it's for even your, statewide governor, Senate race. But putting that aside, I will accept that your vote doesn't count if you can tell me everything that is on your ballot this year, right? Or in a presidential year. Sure, you know the president, great. You know the statewide, fantastic. You don't want to vote for them. Okay. I mean, we can talk about that too. But if there is a school board member on your ballot and you do not know that that person is being chosen based on your vote, then please do not tell me that your vote doesn't count. These small races are decided by dozens, dozens of votes sometimes. So your vote does count. These are the people who are deciding things like who should the principal of our school be? Who should the superintendent of our school be? These are really big deals, right? And so when someone says my vote doesn't count, I would challenge them to look at their ballots and say, actually, you know what? In my town of 6,000 people, my vote really does count for the select board, for the school board, et cetera. And so I think like those things, like that's just that's an education issue, I think, for everyone. And then I think for on the first piece, we need to be intentional about how do we actually get candidates everyone can care about. And if they can't care about that candidate, how can we get them to share that they can't care about that candidate or that they don't care about that candidate? Yeah. So I would say those kind of go hand in hand. They're applicable to everyone, but specifically I think we should be focused on what are young people looking for, asking for.
I think there's also the issue of just people, especially because they're usually just focusing on the biggest elections. They're seeing millions of votes being cast. It's like, well, it doesn't really matter if I don't
Oh, totally.
show up. But then if a whole bunch of people think that way, then it is going to start to matter. But I think sometimes we can focus too much on the mathematical impact of our vote as opposed to just, you know, doing your due diligence in using your right to vote, which I feel has, of course, I feel that that has its own level of importance too, but not every voter feels that way. And I think just the overall answer you had kind of speaks to, that difference between perception and reality. Yeah, maybe the candidates aren't the same. Maybe your vote will matter or your vote will have a much more mathematical impact like on a school board, for example, or city council. But if voters don't realize that, or if they don't believe that, or they're not convinced by that, then it doesn't really matter what the reality is. You have to basically actually get them to realize that. And obviously that's a lot easier said than done. If only one answer to a podcast question could fix all these issues.
Yes.
But yeah, and I'm obviously, I mean, even though I don't take specific, stances for one candidate or another, I would definitely agree that there's definitely an issue with how we find candidates and how we, how accessible the ability to run for office is. But you actually touched on this question a little bit already because you said some of the reasons for youth not voting are similar to reasons that older voters don't vote. So I'll try to rephrase this a little bit. How unique do you think are the reasons for youth not voting compared to older voters?
I don't think the surface reasons are that different. I think that so a lot of people feel like their vote doesn't count. A lot of people feel like they have to vote for the lesser of two evils. I think with young people, we understand that it doesn't have to be this way at a certain point. It's just, oh, well, I it doesn't wait, there are so many different ways to do this. Why are we sticking with this one that seems to be causing problems? Not just sort of neutrally letting them go, but causing actual strife in this country. And I think that young people more often feel empowered to make that choice to say, no, I'm not going to do that. But I also do think it is a little bit the education piece that is, well, they're not really sure how exactly, like, where are they going to park when they go to vote? Do they have to wait in line? Oh my gosh, I don't want to wait in line to park or
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, to park or to vote, right? And so I think like it's just easier if you're not in the habit of voting to not be a voter. Voting is a habit. Like the number one way we know if you're going to vote or not is whether you voted last time. So,
Yeah.
I think that's a significant problem specifically around youth turnout. But I do think that there are a lot of similarities between reasons that the general populace doesn't vote and youth don't vote.
I think one that might be a little bit more unique to voters, and you touch on a little bit, is I think just the or progressively deteriorating investment, I guess, in civic education. I think civic education has generally gone down in quality, or we haven't really had enough of it in general. Now, for me specifically, I didn't have too much of an issue with that. And I also, because I just had a more natural interest in it, I went and looked for information myself. Now, obviously, my research skills weren't exactly sharp then, but it kind of made me think of, I've brought this up to a couple of guests before. One guest I had on a while ago, he talked about basically, he noticed over time because he really liked getting old civics textbooks. And his observation was that we've gone from teaching civics to teaching government. And difference basically being that civics, you're actually teaching kids why their responsibilities as a citizen and why it's important for them to participate in elections and how government is in relation to them, whereas just teaching more about government is a little bit more rote and fact based. Do you feel that might be a contributor to? Do you even agree with that sentiment generally?
That education is definitely a contributor to, or lack of education is a contributor to low youth turnout, voter turnout in general. I think I don't disagree with your previous guest. I do think that civics is more about how you actually engage with your government, but before they're the government, right? When candidates are running, they're just a candidate. That is, I mean, they may also be an incumbent, but when they're running, they are a person who lives in your jurisdiction and has decided to stand up and go do something about the problems they see. You may not agree with them, with that person, but that's different than, you know, Schoolhouse Rock, how does a bill become a law? Right? That's government. Like, we can't do anything really about that right now, is like, but I can elect people who I think will do something different. So I think for me, civics is more about like, how am I interacting in my little piece here so that when you go off and are a part of the government, you are taking my thoughts and feelings with you. They are not two separate bubbles, right? They are a Venn diagram. There is a lot of overlap. And obviously, elections like town meeting are direct democracy. Just to be very clear, there are big problems with town meeting as well as a concept. But I think, yes, part of it is education. I do think a big part of it is this attitude that government is just such a problem. It's just such a problem. It's not a solution to anything. And as a society, we've sort of just started accepting that and being like, yep, government's bad. Every politician is corrupt and there's nothing we can do about it. I'm going to just dig deeper into my own community and it's going to get smaller and smaller. And eventually it's just going to be me in my house. I think we have to start teaching what government is actually giving to everyone around. What giving is the wrong word, but is actually providing to everyone. Public roads, right? we just wouldn't have them if the government didn't want us to have them. I happen to get a great public education. The government used to provide great public education. I don't think they're really doing that right now. But we're so busy fighting about these esoteric policies that we're not focused on, oh, right, government actually can do good things. Let's think about that. What do you want the government to do? We should also have big esoteric conversations. We should be able to think constructively and critically. But in the end, the government's not just there to tell you you can't build your house the way you want to. The government is there to say, you know what, actually, we want this neighborhood to kind of feel this way. By choosing to live in this neighborhood, you're agreeing to that. And we're making sure that everyone around you also agrees to that. So I think like there's this there. So yes, I think civic education is the absence of civic education is part of the problem. It's become history, it's become government, it's become social studies. And we should have classes about how the hell you're supposed to participate in our democracy.
I think it's a very valid way of looking at it too, and that is something that I feel is a little bit different than past generations too. As a millennial as well, this malaise, that a lot of people feel about government. Like even when I was a young kid and before, and when I was too young to remember, and even before me, there was that whole like, oh, government sucks and it's dumb and it does all these things wrong. But it did feel like there was a lot more of a somewhat joking matter about it. Like, late night host would often, just go all across the board, like make fun of these people just to, I mean, not necessarily like very like trying to like grind them into dust or anything like that, but they did seem to be a lot less biting commentary. Whereas now I think you get a lot less of that. It's a lot less of a joking matter, it feels like, about these politicians, these political issues, just because it does feel like, because it feels a lot more of like a existential problem, I guess. And it does feel like younger people, even younger than us, are feeling much more existential dread about everything. I think that has also seeps into the whole fact of youth, in particular, now having these troubles with turnout. I don't know if that necessarily made sense, but I kind of get that vibe as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've elected a lot of bozos too, right? In the last 40 years, like absolutely just
Yeah.
like unacceptable. Like we shouldn't
Yeah.
have both sides. I want to be super clear, both sides. We've just ignored things. Things have gotten swept under the rug. Things have been like, brushed off. But in the end, it keeps coming back to, yeah, but the other guy's worse. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
What a great way to run a government. What other job would you ever apply for and just keep saying like the other candidates are worse than I am? Right? You wouldn't. You just talk about how great you are. And I think that's a huge narrative problem. And by the way, one that we can change. Right? This is all changeable. I do not want to go down the rabbit hole that is, well, I guess this is it for us. I have to believe that things can get better and that there are actions we can take to make things better. And I have never been someone who's particularly cool. And so I don't really care that I don't look cool while I'm trying, right? Like, let's try. Let's see if we can make things better. You think that everyone who runs for office is corrupt? Okay, why don't you run for office? Let's figure out how we can get you to run for office as someone who self-identifies as not being corrupt. Like, how can we actually do this thing? And right now, there are a lot of gatekeepers who are actively preventing people from doing that thing. And that's up to us. We get to change it. We get to do that. What a cool opportunity. You have to do it safely. You can't break the law, but we can change laws. That's the thing. Arguably, sometimes it gets harder than other times. It doesn't have to be easy, though. It can be hard, and we can try, a variety of things. But that's really the message of the democracy to-do list, right? That is the name of my Substack, is like, Here are things you, individual person, can do. And also, by the way, here are things our democracy can do. Here are things that can change in our democracy as a whole. It is a democracy to-do list in that way.
I like the fact that, you know, the democracy to-do list does by definition have a more practical view on things. It's not like super flowery and theoretical. Now you need the theoretical.
Totally.
I'm a firm believer you need the theory and the practice, but a lot of times don't get enough into the practical. And I will admit that I am not the most optimistic person from naturally, but I certainly agree with that too. Is you have to try.
You have to
You
have a
can't
little bit of
just
optimism. You host a podcast
yeah.
about politics. There's got to be
No,
something there.
Oh no! I do. But sometimes I will admit though, every once in a while, sometimes I can just look at things and be like, "Goodness, am I actually making an impact?" I will be truthful about that. But you know, there are other times though where then I feel like, you know, nope, we're gonna do something about this, even if whether it works out or not. I am going to do something, and we're gonna see if we can make a serious change here. And I think that's a really admirable trait for people to have. So I can definitely appreciate that coming from you. But that is a good point though. If I truly was that much of a pessimist, I wouldn't be doing all this stuff that I'm doing right now.
To be fair to you,
admittedly fall back into that.
yeah, to be fair to you and your listeners, I have really bad days too when I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
My house is on fire and the only thing I have is this glass of water to put it out. Right? Like it is hard, and we have to also care for ourselves. But overall, a good attitude for something like this can really make a change, and also recognizing the deep impact that small actions can have is so important, and cannot be overstated. Campaigns, these statewide campaigns, these presidential campaigns are massive. They are massive. But there's a group that I'm a part of in Seattle that they get together once a month and talk about what they can do. And I really like them. These are people with whom I want to work. I want to do things that make us all feel powerful. And the big campaigns are asking us to vote. Sure. Okay, fine. But in the end, democracy really is community, and community really is democracy.
Well, as you touched on, even the biggest changes start with small steps, and
Yeah.
that's another thing I struggle with too. Sometimes I try too much to get to the end of something when I like, no, need to take the smaller steps first. We need to build up to that point. But you know, that can be a very natural thing for people to do too. But let's go more into those practical solutions, since you are much more in the election reform space now. Something that is very near and dear to my heart as well too. I think a lot about these election reforms. So obviously, there's many things that these systems can improve on.
Yep.
Now, what the solutions are might be large disagreement on. But for you, what are 2 to 3 ways that election systems can be changed specifically to improve youth voter turnout, whether it's by the structure of elections or outreach or something else like that?
Sure. Well, there's the one thing that I think about all the time. I'm from Massachusetts. I now live in Washington State. Washington State, we all get ballots mailed to us. You register to vote, you get a ballot. We've got an election in February, and I've already got my ballot for it. Everybody should get sent a ballot. If you are 35 years old and you have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, and one of them's got ballet and one of them has a detention, and you're sort of running around and saying like, oh my gosh, it's a Tuesday. Oh my gosh, it's one of the election Tuesdays. I have to also find time in addition to picking up my kids. Like, I have to go vote. Why do we need to have that scramble? The answer is we do not need to have that scramble. That doesn't make sense anymore. It is twice. It's time for everyone to have mail-in voting. Youth turnout will go up. Everyone's turnout will go up. That is a real measurable thing that we have already done in several states. It's not just Washington. It's not just Oregon, right? It increases turnout. It reminds you that there's an election coming. Who the hell has an election in February? Wait, apparently I do.
Yeah.
I know that because I just got sent a ballot. It's also arrived with plenty of time for me to do the research, right? I can sit at my dining room table and I can look up the things that are on my ballot, the people that are on my ballot, and I can say, yes, no, I'm going to skip that. I don't care about it. I'm going to be someone who participates in this election because my government sent me a ballot. Mm. So I think there's that. Like, that's a real concrete thing. And I am very interested in expanding vote by mail. I think that it also it solves many, many problems. The other thing that I'll say is that I think the way that we vote is not just limited to literally like, where are you filling out your ballot? How are you doing it? I'm a huge proponent of proportional representation and ranked choice voting. That the two together can really expand our democracy in a way that I think is very cool and also very necessary at this point. If you have many candidates to choose from, you get to be the nuanced voter you actually are, right? So you get to say, I care about environmental issues, I care about abortion issues, I care about tax issues, and oh, look, this person lines up with me almost entirely. That's amazing. They get my number one. I think they're great. This person lines up with me, but maybe not in every single way, but I'd rather have them than this other person. So I'll rank them second, third, fourth, fifth, and onward, right? If we do that, we will have, pun intended, checked the box to get youth turnout. Because if your complaint is you don't have enough to choose from and you have to choose between the lesser of two evils, ranked choice voting allows you to do that and allows more candidates to actually have a shot at winning. So we got to open up the primaries. We got to have blanket primaries, which is what we have in Washington, where everyone runs on the same primary ballot. But then we got to have, 4 or 5 folks on the general election ballot so we can rank them and actually have a government that reflects people, the people that they represent. So for me, it's mail-in voting, and let's bump it up. Ranked choice voting, proportional representation. Let's do it.
When I first found out about several states, where I think Colorado is one of them too, that they do all vote by mail, I was like, I didn't know you could do that, because here in Florida we don't have anything like that. Those are almost, I think all those states that do that are further out west. So it was a very enlightening thing. Like, I didn't know that there was a time where they would just give it to everybody. But I do want to also the proportional representation and ranked choice voting is something I want to do a podcast on too. So it's something I really want to dive in and learn about more. And I mean, it is the proportional representation is now ranked choice voting is starting to get a little bit more of a foothold in the political conscience, but proportional representation, I think, is still a lot like, completely foreign to us over here, just because, a lot of these, like several European countries use it, like in Britain or over in all the way over in New Zealand. I think Australia does it too.
Um,
But or
Britain
maybe
does
they don't.
not, but Ireland does. Ireland has proportional representation.
Ireland. Oh, I thought Britain did.
They have everyone's democracy is slightly different, but
Okay.
actual proportional representation with ranked choice voting, that's Ireland, which is also really cool.
With ranked choice.
And I
Okay.
I will just give a shout out to an alternative podcast that you actually might also like, The Future of Our Former Democracy by my friends at More Equitable Democracy. They do a whole podcast about how Ireland decided to start using ranked choice voting and PR, because it was the way that they ended up solving the Troubles problems. So this is the
Mhm.
90s that they were like, we need a way to do this. This is not something that happened 2, 3, 4, 500 years ago. I was alive in the 90s, right? And they got together and said, hey, we got to figure this out. We have a huge, huge, insurmountable millennia's worth of problems. We have to figure out how to do this. It's a really cool podcast. It's also just a really cool way of thinking about citizen government. So, yes, happy to talk about ranked choice voting, proportional representation all day, every day. But yeah, I do think that that will directly impact youth turnout. If you ask young people what they care about, they often say climate change. That makes sense. They're going to have to live on this planet longer than, me. So, based on that, based on how important it is to them, you would think that some candidates would be doing something about it, but they're not. They can't. They go to DC, they go to their state houses. They're there's limited. Everything becomes a binary. Yes, no. There's no negotiations. There's no ability to do that because everyone is stuck in this binary system. I have worked for so many candidates who are interested in change, but they can't make it happen because they are also stuck in the binary, right? Opening it up and using ranked choice voting and PR means that we get to actually vote what we want, vote what we feel, instead of just saying, well, I guess this is how I'm going to demonstrate that I care about the environment. I'm going to vote for the person who wants to ban hamburgers. There's actually more than one way to care about the environment. And our current system does not reflect that at all. And that's a huge problem for young people in particular, but really for all of us.
The point you had about, obviously these false binaries that they're rampant in today's political discussion. I think also though with proportional representation now, whether we agree or disagree that proportional representation is the way to go, I think also it's not just the whole binary yes or no, but I think for most people in office, it really wouldn't behoove them to support proportional representation because, well, they're winning under the current system. So if they're winning under the current system and that system is going to make it much more likely they don't win, why would they support it? So I think that there is also that issue too. But and then that's not just with proportional representation. That's also like reforming ballot access, for example. Like, oh, if I'm winning under the current rules, why would I change them? You know,
It's a great question.
I
Why would
yeah,
you?
exactly.
Can I
So
take
it
like
is
15 seconds to answer it though, really quickly?
go sure, go ahead.
PR, ranked choice voting, all of these election reforms mean that we're increasing turnout, period. And you, as a candidate, now get to talk about your policies and are not expected to stay within these made up boundaries, right? So you have more voters to persuade, which is great. And you get to talk about the thing you care about, which is ostensibly why you wanted to run anyway. Is this a super simplified version of why you should support election reform? Yes. I'm happy to talk to any candidate about what this means for their race. But in the end, this is a pro voter reform. And if you are a candidate who is pro voter, you should appreciate the reform.
I'm sorry, that answer was more than 15
I
seconds,
know,
so I
I'm
have to take it.
sorry.
I'm just kidding. No, no, no.
I tried to keep it short.
No, no, it's all good. Well, if any current officials in office hear that answer, I'd like to hear from you. See how you feel about that. But going back to the youth voter question
Yes.
in general, I do enjoy these rabbit trails though. It is really just so many fascinating ways you can go with it. But I often take the approach that all of us can do better when it comes to politics. So I don't want to necessarily say it's always the system. And I think I do. Obviously, it's unnecessarily abrasive and simplistic and not entirely accurate to be like, oh, youth voters are dumb and lazy, even though, some people are going to say that. I do, however, think that there are things that youth voters can improve on as well. So, how much do you agree or disagree with that idea? And if you do agree, what can youth voters do to improve their own engagement besides just obviously to go vote, of course?
Well, they should go vote. Like, take responsibility for your own self, and then you can
Yeah.
expand it. But I would challenge them to think small. I would challenge them to say, can you get a single one of your friends to come with you to vote? Maybe you have to go do it by yourself first so that when your friend asks, where do you park? You can answer the question. But I cannot overstate how much trusted messengers for our democracy matter. And you are a trusted messenger to your friends. So if you participate, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably care. You should go get one or two of your friends to also care. You can all go to election center together. Maybe you can walk there, enjoy the weather. Maybe you can go out for ice cream afterward. I used to drive people to the polls who either didn't want to or could not drive themselves. Go get your friends and tell them how important this school board election is to you. Doesn't have to be giant. It doesn't have to be, this is how we save the world. It has to be, I care about our school system. I think you probably also care about our school system. I'm telling you how to demonstrate that care. This is awkward and it's hard, and I'm not going to pretend that it's super easy. I am going to tell you, though, that you have a lot more power than you think you do, especially with your friends. So I know that's not really like the big giant solution that perhaps a lot of folks are hoping for. I am not sure there is a big giant solution outside of election reform. I do think that if every single young person who voted in 2025 brought a friend to vote in 2026, we would double, by definition, the number of young people who voted. Right. So think small and recognize your own power. I know that's probably not the answer you wanted.
No, that's a perfectly fine answer. You're right. It's not gonna. There, it is. Even if there is a grandiose solution to this problem, we're not gonna just find it just by talking about it for a few minutes. We're gonna have to sit there and think about it. But see, peer pressure is good. Guilt trip your friends into going to vote. No, I'm kidding. But it is true that having people that who vote is going to make you much more likely to vote as well.
And also, just ranked choice voting and other election reforms are going to be on ballots across the country this year. There are going to be members of Congress on their ballots. Great, that's fine too. Make sure you find out. If you're not really into voting, okay, we can talk about that. But if you're not into voting, but you do wish that you could be into voting, just see if there is an election reform effort happening in your district on your ballot or the ballots next door to you that maybe they need help, right? You can participate in election reform. Groups like Fair Vote Washington, who I still do a lot of work with, we just hosted a lobby day. Almost 200 people came. That's wild. That's wild. But they came because they cared, and it made a huge difference. The bill is moving. So truly look it up, see what interests you, but also think about election reform when you're thinking about your ballot.
I'll definitely second that. Sometimes we just think about, well, there's people to vote for,
Totally.
but there's ballot measures to vote for too.
Absolutely.
So, and that probably is something that we can also do better about. We, as in the general, we can do better about teaching people is on the ballot as well. So, what are some strategies, whether you've seen them up close, you've been a part of them? I know you said that there wasn't necessarily like a specific youth voter strategy that you or specifically or that was necessarily a huge part of the campaign, or whether you studied these strategies from afar that have noticeably led to greater youth turnout.
When you work on a campaign, there are different buckets of voters, like I was talking about earlier.
Mhm.
And I have worked on some really tough uphill races, some really tough uphill battles, including the Doug Jones Senate race in 2017. And the key in that race was talking to people who had been traditionally ignored. Alabama elects only Republicans. Statewide Democrats can't afford to talk to every single Democrat. We, the campaign, were calling people who hadn't been called in decades. Massachusetts voters, I get called like 100 times every election, right? I'm not going to forget there's an election. Those guys in Alabama were like, oh my gosh, there's an election. Thank you for calling. Can you tell me a little bit about Doug Jones? Right? We reached out to people who traditionally have been ignored. So I think that that also works with young people, but you have to be honest with them. You have to be direct. You can't, I don't think there is value in saying, the future of our world depends on you showing up, right? That's too much pressure. You sound
Yeah.
ridiculous. But also send them a text. Don't pretend that they've forgotten to vote. We're not forgetting to vote every 2 years. We are deciding not to vote, probably. So give them something to vote for and then tell them you did that thing. And I know that sounds, again, very general, but I really do think that young people are getting their news from sources that are not necessarily what we would call traditional. So, how are you going to cut through in that? Well, you got to do something. You have to do something. And it's something beyond, you should vote for me. Demonstrate your power, demonstrate what you've done, and then tell the young people you did it. Don't pretend you didn't. Don't pretend that caring is uncool. Care, be passionate, do the thing you want to do. And then be very uncool and tell everyone around you that you did it, including the young people, and also listen to what they're asking for. I think it's really I think the whole Biden effort to limit um ridiculous fees when you're buying tickets and stuff like that was like, that's such a cool thing that I never would have thought the government could have solved. But I hate going on to one of the ticket buying sites and spending twice as much as I thought because the ticket cost $100, but the fees also cost $100. Like, that was like such a cool thing. And then he was sort of like, okay, well, now I did it and I'm never going to talk about it again. And also, it didn't go as well as I thought. So I guess I won't. It's like, gosh, young people really care about that issue in like a weird way. So yeah, I think actually engaging, right? Like we did with those folks in Alabama to be like, hey, I know you don't usually participate. I'm not going to give you a hard time about that. This election is really close. This election really matters. And we really want to make sure that you have access and to make sure that you know it's happening. And we won. We won by this much, but we did win. And I think that genuine engagement was in no small part responsible for that.
Yeah, genuine engagement versus, just reaching out because, well, you're trying to get their vote and you think you have a good chance of winning them. No, actually genuinely engage with people. I think even people that are more regular voters don't necessarily feel like they're genuinely engaged either, whether it's Republican, Democrat, Independent. I think that's there are a lot of people can relate to that sentiment. Now, let's put you back in your political consultant shoes. I like to include questions. I know we've already gone a little bit on this already, but I like to include not only questions about actionable tips in my interviews, but how those tips can be employed by a variety of political persuasions. What's one piece of advice you'd give each to a Democratic campaign, a Republican campaign, and an independent campaign who want to reach out to the youth? Or do you even think that there's necessarily like a particularly different strategy for each of those groups?
I really don't think there is a different strategy. I think you gotta be genuine. And it is okay that you care about the thing you care about, but you have to actually care about it, right? I don't know anyone who decided to run for office because they were sort of like, well, I kind of care about this one thing and like, we'll see how it goes. You're running for office because you care about something. It doesn't matter at some point if it tests well or if the messaging is super clear. Really spend some time thinking and spend some time with your trusted friends and family, your kitchen cabinet, and think about why you're running and then talk about it. I worked for Senator Warren for a long time. She cares a lot about banking. That's what she's devoted her life to. Her whole thing in 20 was let's make banking boring again. Banking really ought to be boring. And it's not. It's not because we're letting people run all over the place with their money. So let's just make banking boring. And I'm going to talk about taxes. and I'm going to talk about all these other things that are really boring, but because she really cared about them, it was interesting, right? That was cool to see. Be yourself. And if you don't win, think about that. Think about, why did I actually not win? Like, really do some investigating, and polling matters, but there is a way to be yourself and to win a race. And if there isn't, then I think that's kind of a different set of problems. Being genuine really, really matters. Don't try to squish yourself into a box. This is also advice for like how to run a good campaign, not necessarily how to win a campaign. But in my experience, that's really valuable. Just being yourself. Ugh, I
And
sound
even
so boring.
oh no, I mean it sounds simple and it sounds kind of woo woo, I guess, but it is true. And even outside of politics, some people just get it. Some people are endeared to athletes or general or some other sorts of celebrities because they really care about one particular thing, not even necessarily the thing they're known for, but they really care about something else, and people go, oh wait, I love that thing too. It can be the same thing for politics. There's always going to be, like you just said, with if you find a specific policy issue that you really care about, no matter how much the general population thinks it's kind of lame, there's always going to be somebody else that's like, yo, I love that stuff. I mean, if I could not, well, I'm not going to say I could not care less about farming. Obviously, farming's important, but it is definitely not my speed. But there's plenty of farming groups that care a great deal about it. And of course, they have a tremendous impact on our food supply. So you can find any other policy like that too, that somebody deeply cares about, and other people are going to care about it too.
One of the questions I ask, and I know we're close to wrap up time, but one of the questions I
Yeah.
ask when I'm being interviewed for a job by a candidate is, why are you running? And often they give me some, 3-point plan, or like, these are the things that matter. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I want you to get on your soapbox and tell me why you're doing this. This is awful. Running for office sucks. It's really
Oh
hard
yeah.
and it's exhausting. So you got to tell me why at the end of October, when we are so close to the finish line, you're still going to be getting out of bed in the morning. Like, it's not because of your 3-point plan. It's because you actually care about something. So tell me why you're doing this. That's the question you have to be able to answer. You don't have to shout it from the rooftops, but you have to know it. And the people around you have to know it too.
I think that's a perfectly good way to end this particular portion of the podcast. Really want to thank you for your time here, Stephanie, talking about all your insights with you for Turnout. But one last question. I always like to end guest interviews with a random question of the day, non-political, or if it is political, it's always going to be something fun and not serious. Also, just to give a more well-rounded view of the
I'm
guest
more nervous about this
as a
question
person
than
in
any
general.
of the other questions.
Don't worry. It's not going to be any gotchas. But today's random question of the day for you is, what state has the most appealing county boundaries?
Whoa. Oh my gosh.
Hang on. If you need some help, I've got you covered. I have the map right here because I wanted to set this up. So they're going to share the screen.
As you're sharing, I will just say that in Massachusetts, counties are like not a huge thing.
Oh yeah, I want to say is it Massachusetts? Like half the counties got rid of their governments, I think, right? And I think
All of
I want to
them
say
except
Connecticut doesn't have
one.
all of them except one. I think Connecticut got rid of like half of them or something. That was a very odd thing I
We're
figured out too.
very
Like,
into
oh,
towns. Like you said, we're very
yeah,
into towns. Massachusetts has 351 towns, and I assume some number of counties, but I don't know it. I'm
yeah,
having trouble
yeah,
seeing this. I see
yeah.
that you
Oh,
shared it, but it's not big enough.
let me. Oh, yeah, that is weird. I can see it on the side there, and it's. Am I able to make that
Hang on, let me see if I
bigger?
can move it to my other screen.
Okay,
Let's see.
that's weird. I didn't think it would be
There we go. This should work.
this.
I'm just not looking at
Okay, awesome,
my
awesome.
camera anymore. So give me a second.
Yeah, that's okay. So, yep, right here is there's the north part of the United States, and then there's south, and then of course Alaska and Hawaii. Yeah, I think about really absurd questions like this. If you want, I'll answer first.
Please do.
Okay, so I am a fan of the trying to be as maybe it's just being OCD. I like the symmetrical parts. Like Iowa, I like really a lot, except for the fact that this is a merged county there. I don't know why they decided to do that. That kind of annoys me greatly. But I feel like the Midwest has really, for the most part, figured out pretty boxy. Like my state, Florida, doesn't really seem like there's rhyme or reason. Texas feels like they put a lot of effort into it here. Then we're starting to rush through it a little bit when they got to the Southeast. And in the West part, they're just like, okay, let's just put straight lines in just random places. Not going to think we're tired of drawing these. So what about you?
Well, it's funny you say Iowa because Iowa was the first place I thought of, right? Because it's like the Iowa caucuses are county run. So
Yeah,
I'm aware of what they kind of look like. I think I prefer larger counties. So I'm looking at you, Nevada. I'm looking at you, Washington. We've got some big counties, and even Arizona a little bit. Like I like the wide
Arizona.
open spaces, partially because to me, if you would like to live in an extremely rural area, you should be able to do that and still have a government. Right. And
Makes sense, yeah.
so I think, unincorporated parts of states can be really tough in that way.
Right.
That's another election reform thing. We can talk about rural voters another time because they are extremely important and often ignored. But to me, I'm looking at these counties and I'm seeing a lot of unincorporated areas. And I think that those folks hold a lot of power. And I think that's pretty cool. They've chosen to live their life the way they want. And I think that's great. So I'm gonna say like
No, I never
the
thought about it that
West with
way.
big counties. Big counties.
Ne- Never thought about it like that. That's a neat way to put it. Although I do wish that seemed like there was a little bit more rhyme or reason to these random shapes, but whatever. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcast, I'm sorry that you can't actually see it, but go to mapchart.net/USA-counties.html. That's so you can see what we were looking at as well. But thank you for humoring me with that question. I do think of just silly things
That's great.
like that.
Good question.
Good. Awesome. Well, now we are going to actually officially wrap this up
All
now.
right.
So, Stephanie, thank you very much for being on here. Any particular links that you want me to share?
Oh, yes. Everyone should take a look at my Substack. You can just find it at democracytodolist.com. That's where I would
Okay.
go.
Well, I will put a link to it in the show notes. So
You can also message me there if you have questions or if you want to see a certain Substack topic. So feel free. I really do love hearing from folks.
awesome. Well, I will put that in the show notes as well, so you can easily access it there. My show notes, real quick, my LinkedIn, which I post on very often, my Facebook page, Paul Rader, author and speaker, my book that I wrote on political independence on Amazon. You can get it ebook and paperback format. My email, paulraderwrites@gmail.com, a medium.com profile that I write on from time to time, and then my website, paulrader.org. And I think that's, my 5-day educational email course about how we can all be more effective at depolarizing politics. So that is going to officially end things here today. So thank you, Stephanie. And thank you so much for those of you listening at home. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share for YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And we will see you next time.